So the idea this week starts with the importance of perspective. For every British civilian who was killed in the Second World War, that's about 70,000 people, 3 people, more than 230,000, were killed by COVID. You can compare it not with the Black Death of medieval times, that was much, much worse, but certainly with the Great Plague of the 1660s that Samuel Pepys and Defoe wrote about so memorably. In other words, this is one of the great civilian catastrophes to hit Britain ever. It's really, really big. And because we're so close to it, I think it's sometimes quite hard to remember to see just how extraordinary the pandemic was for us. What I need to know, I think what we all need to know, is how has government changed as a result? The effects are still around us all today. The businesses which have vanished, never to come back again. We have, of course, all the memories of the people who died, all of that grieving still going on around us. We have people right up and down the country with long COVID. We have people uncounted, but probably more than 1 million people who are still self-sheltering because they are terrified of the effects of COVID. They know it's still out there, so we are surrounded by the effects even now. It's absolutely right that we have a big inquiry into what the government got right and the government got wrong. But the inquiry being led by Baroness Heather Hallett, is already driving Conservative England both mad and paranoid. And in many ways, it's not going to tell us, I suspect, the things that we need to know. I don't think we really need to know for how long Boris Johnson thought about sacking Matt Hancock. Do we need to see the detailed WhatsApps between Rishi Sunak and Downing Street when he was thinking about eat out to help out? I think we have made our judgments, he said carefully, about the personalities involved in the pandemic already. We know what we think about Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and the rest of it. And although it will provide huge numbers of headlines and great material for journalism, I'm not sure that endless stories trawling over the personal details of what happened at that moment of extraordinary crisis and panic at the heart of British government in 2020 are that useful. What's going to be the planning for the next pandemic? Because there will be another pandemic. In other words, what's the status right now of the Nightingale hospitals? How quickly could they be re-established if they had to be? What is the condition of the stocks of PPE right now? Have we learned those lessons? Do we have all the gowns and the gloves and the rest of it that we need? What about our vaccine manufacturing capacity? There was a much heralded £250 million investment into a big new vaccine manufacturing centre in Oxfordshire. But it was sold to the American pharmaceutical company Catalent, and late last year work there was paused. So what's going on there? Why don't we have, after all the achievements of vaccine manufacturing and vaccine rollout in this country, a really clear, thought-through plan for vaccines for the next pandemic? Those, I think, are the questions we need to answer.
Morning, Boris. Do you have a sec?
So you know, never interviews here.
But meanwhile, we have this absolutely extraordinary confrontation between Boris Johnson, the last but one Prime Minister, and Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, over the release of WhatsApp messages and phone records to Baroness Hallett's inquiry. Now, Johnson says, you can have everything, right? You want it all, you can have it all. He sounds very open, very grandly prepared to help the inquiry. But it doesn't take much decoding to understand that what he's really about is that he has decided in his feud with Sunak that the messages are going to be even worse for Sunak than they are for him. In other words, he believes there will be messages there which show that Sunak, as the classic accountant politician, looking at the numbers, thinking about business, thinking about industry, is not thinking as hard as he should have been about the number of people who are going to be killed if we mingle and eat together and huddle together as we used to do in the middle of the pandemic. So he thinks there's really bad stuff there for the Prime Minister. This is an extraordinary feud, and it's going to hang over the Conservative Party between now and the election, and indeed well after the election, as Tories go for each other. So, in a way, it's the kind of thing that the centre-left should enjoy, wallow in a bit, feel a bit gleeful about. And I would plead with everybody to show no glee about any of this, because what is happening is that on the right of politics, there is an anti-science populism bubbling up almost everywhere. You see it day after day on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It goes like this. There was never actually any need for a lockdown and all those restrictive social measures. Had that not happened, only a very small number of people, a few thousand, would have been saved. I think we have to be commonsensical, balanced, humane, and have a proper sense of history. We have to remember what it felt like when we saw those terrifying footage of bodies writhing and twitching in the corridors of foreign hospitals as the pandemic was rolling towards us bit by bit. People were genuinely panicking, genuinely terrified. And the scientists advising government, and I talked to an awful lot of them at the time, honest, decent people doing their level best to try to mitigate the possible effects of this great plague. So when we get lots of people on the right now saying, the whole thing was nonsense, this was some kind of authoritarian leftist plot by civil servants and cold-hearted scientists to kind of restrict the liberties of ancient England, then we have to take that not only with a huge pinch of salt, but we have to be a bit angry about that as well. The lockdowns did save huge numbers of lives. We have no idea, we have no parallel history which tells us what life in this country might have been like without the lockdowns. Had we mingled and eaten and taken transport and gone to work together in the way that we once did, we have no idea how quickly the pandemic would have spread. There is an extreme, weird paranoia, which I think we have imported largely from the wilder fringes of the American hard right into this country. And it worries me a lot because this is going to be part of the inheritance of the next government. And I think it will be a Labour government. So it's going to be part of what the centre-left is going to pick up. There is going to be what I call the great revulsion against the modern world, the great revulsion against science bubbling up from the right. It's going to be a huge problem for a future Labour government for many, many years to come. And part of the point of this week's column is to warn people on the left about the seriousness of what's going on. I think, in the end, part of conservative Britain is so horrified about the world in which we all live, so rejecting of the modern world entirely, that this great revulsion is being seeded into the right of British politics. I think it's a huge problem and not something to be celebrated. If you'd like to stay up to date and you'd like to see the latest explainers, field reports, feature stories and special discussion episodes, then please, folks, subscribe to our channel today.
Brought to you by Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Experienced wealth managers who go above and beyond to guide and support you. Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow.